flagging him was, buddy just got shot, all this stuff. And look, you know, the flagging of the dude as he's dragging him, I get it. It's not preferable to flag the dude, but understand that you were given a hard situation, right? There's a bad guy with a shotgun right around that corner, and you have to drag your buddy one-handed while pulling security. Maybe a better option would have been to chicken wing the gun, grab the dude like this and pull security, right? But I've never been in that situation. A lot of people that are commenting on that have never been in that situation. I think the dude did a good job for the sandwich he was handed. So anyway, the one point I want to make about all these videos that we see about people doing these jobs is they're dangerous jobs. Getting in a gunfight, there's not 100% of the time an answer or amount of training that will get you out of that gunfight. That's just, you don't have to have been in a gunfight to realize that they're dangerous. It's just the reality. You can.
Let me ask you guys this. Okay, so we, as police officers, we don't want to be in gunfights. If we have to engage a person or be engaged or potentially engaged, we want to be in shootings, because a gunfight insinuates that rounds are going both directions, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I think that this is probably true. Most people in law enforcement who have gotten into a shooting will talk about gunfights like they're gunfights. I mean, I think they're still gunfights personally. Like, it's gunfighting, right? So let me know what you guys think about that in the chat. Let me address a couple of things. First of all, Mr. Boston, when only one side has a gun, then it's tyranny and not a fight. So, I mean, if you were protecting yourself or your family and you had to use a gun to do that, what would that be called? Switching shoulders, but keeping your hands in the same position on your rifle. Now, and he might get into that here because he shows that he's starting to put his kit on. I can do that method when I don't have a kit on. But when I have a helmet and I have a vest on, you know, a plate carrier, I just can't do that. My body just doesn't like move that direction. I could work towards that, and I think that that would maybe be better, but I'm just super confident with putting the rifle on my left side and switching my hands. Like, it just is so natural to me. So either one of those ways you can do, and maybe if you work in an environment or a capacity, or maybe even you don't, you're just a citizen, and you're not gonna be wearing any of those things, well then you could opt for either option that's comfortable with whatever equipment that you wear, but you have to make sure that you know, put these things on and try it to make sure it works.
From the low ready position, come up, one headshot, and look at the times for each of these. We'll do 3 in a row from each stance, and then go from there. All right, that was 7-0. That was 6.66. All right.
Things that matter when, you know, time to target, when we're looking at time to target, is target difficulty. How far away is the target? How big is the target? Is it moving? You know, those things are a factor in determining how fast you can accurately engage anything from a ready up position. One of the videos that it was a short video. I'll end up implementing some of this video when I start talking about using your weapon light. But I was shooting, it's on the Instagram, it's probably in the short somewhere, where I'm engaging from my vehicle and then I'm moving throughout this simunition, or that's a airsoft, you know, arena, but I'm engaging targets with simunition. And you know, it's funny because some of the comments, and it's just people on the internet, they're like, oh, you'd be dead already. It's like, well, you don't say that to anybody who's ever on the range shooting, right? Whenever they're just shooting, like, oh, you'd be dead. Like, because this is not what that is. There isn't an actual threat here who's already aiming a gun or doing whatever. This is, you know, working on the fundamentals, time to target. And when I'm shooting at those targets, you know, I mean, I guess they were anywhere from 10 to 15 yards away, but I'm also aiming only for the high A zone. And I'm also shooting with the consideration, this is how I train, that you don't always know where the target is going to be after the first round. I've put out many, many videos on this and talked about this concept and idea to develop familiar processes. And so that means that whatever we're doing in training, we should be expecting to do in real life, okay? So if we're shooting as fast as we can at a target that's 10 yards away, that's a paper target standing there, are we actually building good habits, or are we reinforcing bad habits, which is shooting at a speed which is inconsistent with what you could expect to see in reality? And the targets that I set up for myself, a lot of the time, I set them up to where they could move after I hit them with the first round. So you kind of have to pay attention to the video to really see it. The one place where you can see it really well in the video is when I'm sitting inside the car for one of the runs. The very first target that I engage, it's a partial target, which I only have like this much available to hit. And I would say it's probably maybe 7 to 9 yards away. And after the first round, you see I hit the door, I pin it, bang, I hit it with that first shot. And as I see the target moving, falling, because I slow down the video, you'll see I start to move out of the car and the target's falling over, okay? So in reality, if I was going to engage that target with multiple rounds, and this is just a realistic way of thinking about this, you wouldn't be shooting at the target where it is the entire time, right? You would shoot it once, and then you would try to hit it while it's falling to the ground, right? Which could be very difficult to do, or wait till it hits the ground and then shoot it some more on the ground.
All right, that was 7-0. That was 6.66. All right, that was 6.9. 6.9. Next thing we're gonna do is gonna start in the off shoulder like this. We're gonna do a ready up. See how long that takes. It's gonna be a little bit awkward, but whatever.
You see how awkward it looked? And he actually said it's going to be a little bit awkward.
That one is a little bit low, 1.06. That one's a little left, but still in, 1.14. Okay, again, a little bit low, 0.96. That one was a little bit better. So for this one, now I'm actually passing over, going to my non-dominant side. Okay. That was good. 1.17. 1.17. That one was also good. 1.03. 1.03. All right. That one was a 0.97. Here's our work. The ones that I marked with 3s. So these 3 right here, 1, 2, and 3 were not only the fastest, but they were the most center mass good hits. We have a 2 here, a 2 here, and a 2 there. So that's transposing my dot, shifting a little bit left. And then I have a 3 here, 3 there, and a 3 there. So not bad.
So the first one we'll cover is just staying in your shoulder, right? So there's a couple pros to this. One, most people are better at shooting with their dominant side. You don't believe me? Time yourself on a ready up, head shot.
I just wanted to make a note that I don't know if he mentioned the distance, but the target that he was shooting at was small. So that's a good thing to judge, you know, how fast you can actually be. I have a video on my phone. I guess I won't try to pull it up and show it to you, but my buddy had sent me a video. There was a time when people on Instagram were going around like shooting. They were shooting 4 rounds, and like they were shooting them really fast. And I forget what the time was on that, but when he sent it to me, I was like, I told him, I said, that's not that hard. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, because how close they are to the target. I mean, they were like 4 yards or 5 yards. And, you know, so, I mean, you can get away with a lot doing that. So I made a video of me doing it, and just to show him that it wasn't difficult to do.
Shot like 5 yards away with your right hand, and then switch to your left hand and do the same drill, and see, you know, out of 3, which one's better, right? I know for myself, I'm 100% better with my right hand than I am with my left hand. I've put way more time getting in a gunfight, there's not 100% of the time an answer or amount of training that will get you in your shoulder, right? So there's a couple pros to this. One, most people are better at shooting with their dominant side. You don't believe me? Time yourself on a ready up headshot, like 5 yards away with your right hand, and then switch to your left hand and do the same drill. And see, out of 3, which one's better, right? I know for myself, I'm 100% better with my right hand than I am with my left hand. I've put way more time in on my right hand. I'm just better at it. It's my dominant side. So my accuracy, how soon I'm ready to fire, all of that stuff is going to be better on my dominant side. That's just the way it is. I think you can train to get close, especially ambidextrous people might be able to put the time in, but the majority of us, we're not going to do that. It's just the way it is. We're always going to shoot better with our dominant side. There's a reason it's our dominant side. So that's a pro. We're behind the gun. We're more comfortable.
However, everybody, okay, now this is the common reasoning that usually people that are really, 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 really good at shooting, that, crap on tactics and decision making and identifying and mitigating risk because they think that just shooting is like the number one thing, which actually, I don't know any officers that were killed that they said, well, let's look at what went wrong. And then they checked a box that said marksmanship was a factor. Okay. It's almost always officers committing procedural errors that get them killed, not identifying the risk, right? And maybe they're not identifying it because they haven't had the training to understand the situation that they're in and identify, well, maybe I shouldn't actually be here right now, right? Or complacency, things like that, right? But the distance at which you should be shooting with your off shoulder are almost always going to, or could be shooting with your off shoulder, are almost always going to be that CQB distance. So 7 yards, maybe, you could do like 15 even, or 25. Like 25 is super reasonable. And also you're not going to be moving while you're doing this, because if you're moving, you might as well keep your rifle in your strong shoulder. You're doing this around barricades to minimize exposure. Okay. So it's not even a fair, comparison to say, well, you can do these with you can move and shoot with your right, on your right side, your strong side, and this is the score that you did. But when you did it on your left side, your weak side, your score wasn't as good. So but the problem with that is you're asking me to do things that I wouldn't do, right? On my weak side. Switching to your off shoulder, you're doing it to minimize your exposure to a threat area. Okay. And they're doing it in Ukraine, right? So if you're a civilian and you think that you might find yourself in situations, because that's why a lot of civilians train, right? A lot of civilians train for whatever reasons that they train, but usually it's not, they usually don't say, well, I just train for fun. Although a lot of the times that's true, and that can be true, and that's totally cool. They give you reasons because of like the government, or, look at Israel and Lebanon, look at Ukraine and Russia, right? These are reasons why civilians would train. Well, then you should be an advocate for switching shoulders, right? Because that's what you do to minimize exposure in a trench where you could maybe find yourself, right? That's what you do to minimize exposure when you're on the back of a building and you're taking rounds, but you want to do something, right? And you don't know where the threat is. Well, does it make sense to overexpose yourself to a threat that you cannot see? To engage what? Because of what? Marksmanship? So a lot of people will see the video, and then it's, by the way, if you go to the Instagram, I think I put it on concept_kinetic. I think it's the last video that I put up. It is the clip from the YouTube channel, or the YouTube video that's coming out. A lot of people might see that soldier not sticking his head out, not sticking his body out, but just his rifle and sending rounds that direction. Totally viable, okay? Because the alternative is overexposing yourself to a threat you can't see, to engage a threat where you don't know where it is. And I would argue that doing nothing is also not a great option, because if you're doing nothing, then you're allowing, the enemy to maneuver on you, right? We have to cause things to happen in their space to change their behavior. Just like in law enforcement too, we could be at the end of the hallway holding on a door, and maybe we know he's in there because he's saying, F you, I'm not coming out. Okay, well, let's get a shield up here. And if I have to overexpose myself to deliver rounds from behind the shield, it doesn't sound like a good idea because the door is closed and I'll never see it coming anyways. Which, by the way, there's a reason why most cops die with their gun in their holster or before they fire a round, and that's because they don't see it coming.
Time was a 2:35. All right, time on that, 2.20. All right, 2.33. Okay, 2.64. All right. 2.19, 2.19. All right, 2.55.
I actually like this a lot. And what this is mimicking here is you're moving from a location. Let's say you're moving from cover, right, to another piece of cover because you see the shooter, right? Or you hear it, okay? And you've identified that you're going to come up on the corner of this building and, your right side, your strong side. And before you get there, you want to make the decision to switch your shoulder again, so you don't have to overexpose yourself. And so this is actually replicating you doing that, arriving at that piece of cover ready to go and needing to engage the threat as soon as you get there. Now, also probable is maybe he doesn't know you're there, right? So you get there and you get into position, but maybe you don't have to fire right away. So we don't actually lose anything there. This is a situation where you would, think about doing that. And what would more than likely happen even some of the time, even if you are trained in it and it is something that you want to do, is you might not switch immediately. You're going up to the cover and then you get there and now you're taking rounds. Oh, now I got to get back. So now what are you going to do?
All right. That one was a 3.23. All right. Time on that one, 3.30.
By the way, his times are kind of not relevant. Well, I guess they are relevant, but the thing that we don't know is like what was his starting point? Was he starting from the same spot every single time he ran up? And if he was, then maybe that's a good reference. But there would have to be some standard in place, right? The standard would have to be you start 5 yards away from the barricade on the buzzer. How long does it take you to get around, right? Because you have to establish what is a good time, right? And if he was just standing there on a ready up drill, which he already did, from his weak side, it was like a second or whatever. And also you should, and this might happen as quickly as he had to do it here, approaching the cover. But ideally, if you're going to do it, you want to do it well before you actually arrive there so that when you get there, you're not switching shoulders, in the moment where you could need to engage, if that makes sense. So one thing that actually is important here is where the target is that he's engaging. And I guess it would be directly at the camera here. So right straight off of the cover, because if the target is more to our left as we're looking at him, then his exposure is going to appear to be more. But, and his left arm, he could tuck his left arm in more to even, lessen his exposure. But really, let's look at this and think that this piece of cover here, if we want to call it that, right, is a brick wall, okay? Look here at where he's more exposed. And I would argue that this is all really bad, right? I mean, if you take a round right here, you're in trouble. And there's no way to, you know, get your arm lower to kind of cover that up or anything like that, right? And even if you take rounds in the vest, that's also going to just suck a lot, okay? And going to probably take you out of the fight for sure. Well, not for sure, but it's likely. So he's really, even though we see armor here, because we also don't know what the armor is rated for, I mean, his entire head is basically exposed and 3/4 of his body. Whereas over here, I would argue, you know, I don't know, maybe 75% of his head is exposed and none of his body. And so to me, if we're just picking on average, which one would provide you more protection, then, I mean, clearly it's the one on the left.
Moving on to the next one, the full swaparoo, going over to the non-dominant side. Let's talk about pros first. One really big pro is it's much easier and less of you is exposed, right? That is one pro to switching sides. In my opinion, that's the only pro. Let's talk about some of the cons. One really big con, in my opinion, the transition. The actual time that I have to pick when I'm pieing this corner, whatever it is, where I say, okay, I'm going to transition over to my non-dominant shoulder. If you notice, a lot of people that shoot and transition, as soon as it's time to like move or do anything, they're working back to that right shoulder because they're more comfortable.
I don't think that this is a relevant con at all. It really comes down to your efficiency in completing the task. And again, in the video where I'm running around shooting at targets inside the airsoft facility, you'll see how quickly I'm doing that. Like, this isn't, you know, I've checked the corner, or I'm coming up to the corner, I'm switching. I mean, I don't even want to put a time on it, like half a second maybe. And then you're checking that corner. You've checked around the corner. You've checked the threshold. You know there isn't anybody there. So what's hurting you by switching back to your strong side before you proceed? There isn't some, you know, boogeyman that's going to jump out at that very moment and catch you in the wrong shoulder. And even if they do, they should never see you doing it anyways. Like, developing a time from strong side to weak side to time on target is a good thing to do, just as a reference point for where you're at and ability to complete that task at speed and develop some type of standard. But it doesn't make sense to compare that to, well, I'm already in my strong side, so I just need to do a ready up drill, because you're not switching your shoulder. You should never be switching your shoulder and engaging like that, right? It should have been done already, and you're assessing and to minimize exposure. So it's good for a standard, but it's wrong to compare the two.
The last version we want to talk about is the actual just hybrid, swapping the buttstock over to the opposite shoulder. So pros, let's talk about pros. One pro is it is limited exposure, right? I can keep the gun up, straight up and down. The only thing that's exposed maybe a little bit more is this arm, which if I really want to, I can, tuck in behind the mag well. Next pro is all of our fire hand controls. This hand is still in control of the rifle, so my trigger finger is still doing what my trigger finger does. The only thing that switches is my eye. So my non-dominant eye is what's seeing. You can get kind of used to that. What's nice is you can transpose your reticle. So if you see your reticle, like when you're moving, as long as your eye's behind it, whatever your right eye thinks it's aiming at, it's actually aiming at. So you can kind of transpose your reticle.
Come up, bump over shoulder. All right, so again, foot planted right here. I can slow it down. Right about here is where I took that shot, exposure-wise.
He's doing all this with the gas mask on, which makes it all just that much more difficult.
So guys, my honest opinion about switching sides, I'll be honest, I didn't run the bumping over shoulders very often, but now that I've used it behind cover, I would say easily for 20, 25 yards in, things like that, I'd have to play with it, shooting out to distance, but it's definitely not a bad practice bumping over to that far shoulder. In other words, I don't mind coming here, coming up to a piece of cover, bumping over, and doing this is not so bad to me. If I'm really concerned about exposing myself, or maybe that threat knows I'm there, or whatever, and I really want to limit the amount that I expose myself, I'm probably still going to default to just using my dominant side and leaning out sideways like this with my dominant side. But it's good to have those tools. I like them both. I like bumping over the shoulder. I am not a huge fan of completely switching, and the big reason is, which maybe I'll film some of these, moving and shooting with your left hand, reloads, malfunctions, all of that stuff. So it's really just personal preference. Get out to the range, try out your time, see what works the best.
So again, moving and shooting, that's not really the time and place to be have your rifle when you're off shoulder. And when I say moving, I'm talking about like physically walking, but we could be pieing something in our off shoulder, right? Because again, minimizing exposure. He said, like I said in the beginning, 25 yards and in seems like a very reasonable thing to do. But in order to really kind of sell yourself on this idea, you have to do it in training with simunitions, or I think simunitions is the best, right? It really kind of sends the point home. So let's jump into another video. What do you guys think about the switching shoulders? Is it a new concept to you? Do you guys think it's, something that is just crazy, shouldn't be done, etc.? Or do you think it's a reasonable skill? Like for me, I think that switching shoulders is a basic rifle manipulation, utilizing one of the fundamental principles of combat, which is minimizing exposure. Whether you're using cover or perceived cover, that's what we should be doing, because inches matter, seconds matter, everything matters. And more often than not, minimizing your exposure, especially in a combat situation, probably far more important when you don't know where threats are. And that's one of the big caveats to doing that, because the advocates against it say marksmanship, marksmanship, marksmanship. Okay, but what about when you don't know where the threat is? What about when you hear gunshots, but you don't know where he is? What about if he's potentially concealing himself behind something? Well, I mean, in a law enforcement setting, if we are looking down the end of a hallway and there's a closed door, we're not supposed to be just sending rounds through doors. One of the recent body cam video that I did, the officers were shooting through walls and everything like that. And, a neighbor ran out of the apartment with her baby because she heard bullet holes coming through walls, is what the article said. I don't know if she just heard the gunshots and so that caused her to run out, if there were actually rounds that came through her wall. But I think it's fair to say that we need to not do that. And so we can do that by setting ourselves up appropriately. I'll run that back again so you can look at it just in case you missed it, because I had to watch this a few times to see like what exactly was going on to make sense of it. But what you can't see is that behind or to the right or behind the guy with the pistol are other, people training. And there's enough room to the right of where he is or to his back that they can kind of move around him. And so I think simultaneously what you're going to see is one guy sweeping across the doorway and then another person to his back looking down the hallway, which is, it's fine. But we're going to probably talk about another way to kind of do this. So you can see the guy underneath sweeping across. He's going to have a guy to the right of him getting his back. Now, if we're really worried about angles and exposure and things like that, where this person is to his back, the guy in all black, he's not really covering his back, right? He's looking straight down, but if there's open doorways to the right or to the right of the guy who has his hand on his shoulder, well, then this guy is kind of exposed to those. So this is interesting. And by the way, this is some Israeli stuff. How about dealing with the interruptions? Do you switch to the dominant shoulder or double the training for both sides? Too rare to consider. Switching to you gotta just think about it in terms of minimizing your exposure and you're not moving unless you're just trying to pie something slowly. There's very simple, what the guy before showed us, do what he did. And before you even start shooting, just drill that, right? So what they used to have us do is, get in a shooting stance and your dominant side, and on the buzzer, on the whistle, when I say go, whatever that is, taking a step forward and switching over, taking a step forward and switching back, and just drilling that. Reload, malfunctions, etc. I don't know. I'd have to pick up my rifle and think about it, to be honest with you, talking about malfunctions and things like that. I think inherently you're gonna if you get a malfunction, you're automatically gonna switch back, and that's probably what I would advise at that point. Just switch back, right? Because in the moment when you have a malfunction, the priority is getting your gun up and running, and it is no longer continuing to take ground while minimizing your exposure, if that makes sense. And so, I'm sure that's happened to me, and I'm sure that's what I did. And also, if your rifle isn't set up ambidextrously, if that's a word, so your safeties on the same side and your magazine release are on both sides, then that might be difficult for you to do. So you're inherently going to switch back. And if you have people that are working with you and it's a situation like that, especially CQB, well, you should just transition to your handgun. But if you don't, or you can't, or whatever, then you need to call for cover and somebody else needs to take your spot, right? You should be falling back and fixing that as quickly as possible. So I think I answered your question. You're going to end up switching. Focus more on the process of moving it back and forth, because that's the most important marksmanship. And if you get a malfunction, you'll end up just going back to your strong side to clear it out, because that's priority. So back to this little clip here. So I've watched this and I don't really, this isn't terrible, but the guy is switching his pistol to his left hand. And I guess if you were going to do what he did, that would make sense. I'm not sure what he's doing with his right hand, but because he's minimizing exposure, although what if this room was 3 times as long, right? Would that still be something you'd want to do? No, because your marksmanship off, weak hand with a pistol, especially under stress, it's just not going to happen. So I try to only train things that build good habits that are going to raise your accountability and limit your liability. And so in this situation, what I think would have been a better procedure here is they panned across the door and they've seen that there's nothing to the left, basically, because the guy on the right, as he's looking left, he's like, that's a really short corner. Could there possibly be some really skinny person up against the wall? Probably, sure, but very, very unlikely. So it's not really the concern, which is why he's doing what he's doing here. But if that's what you're going to do, why not just let the guy who's already on that side look that direction, right? And that way you can keep both hands on your gun, because instead of kind of clearing the corner from here, this guy would be clearing the corner from stepping just, just inside here, looking long ways, right? We got both hands on our gun, and I think that would be the best approach in this situation. I don't think you really gain anything by doing what he's doing here. And again, if the rooms are bigger, this doesn't apply to all situations, which is kind of why I have like a little bit of an issue with it. Try to do things most of the time that are going to be applicable to a number of different situations. So you don't have to be like, well, in this situation, I do this. And then if this situation, then I do this instead. That's not going to build good habits or a fundamental process that you can fall back on.
Yeah.
So they just did the same thing they did before. In order to kind of feel like if there is another way, I would have to be able to see the entire picture, and I can't.
Ah, very good, very good, very good, very good. Very good work, boys. Very good work.
Right now, let's say that they need to be covering long. Well, we can't do that, right? And this is where, in probably a video that I'm going to do actually after this is over with, I'm going to talk about this tactic. And Israel, I've seen them, I like a lot of their stuff, like most of their stuff, but I've seen them do this type of covering angles and moving up to opposing threats, where the guy farthest away from the immediate threat isn't focused there. So this guy would be focused in here, and this guy would be, online with him, but focused long ways. And then they would release that to each other.
Very good. It's first time.
And also, what if you're doing this in a more narrow hallway where you couldn't fit guys, two guys, three guys almost side by side, right? Especially with gear on. And so if you had these guys put full kit on, which might be what they're actually, using in their duty use, and then that becomes really cumbersome and really hard to do, well, then we should probably consider, a different approach that allows us to do that in a number of different situations, kind of complete the same task, but it's more applicable to narrower hallways and if we're wearing gear.
Time, I know. Take it easy. Cheat it, compress, yeah.
First thing I'm going to talk about is the orientation of the platform. It's not uncommon that we see people break the gun down and then ride it over the shoulder. I'm not a big fan. Where that came from is in vehicle CQB. So where that came from is if this vehicle, we're in a vehicle, for example, say we're in the driver's seat, and the carbine is along the side, and there's a reason for us to shoot through the windshield, that's where that came from. Literally pulling the gun up and over your shoulder to then clear the dash so we could then shoot through the.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that's true for some people where that's where that came from, because, I only trained with guys that, at the time our primary goal and purpose was not vehicles, and guys were doing this, and that was being taught, so yeah, primarily it's being done because people kind of feel the need or do need the need sometimes to fit through thresholds. So
The windshield, that's where it came from. And then what guys realize is, hey man, we can be even tighter on the threshold. So they start breaking the gun down to give themselves a couple of extra inches on the threshold. I'm not a big fan for a few reasons, especially as the number one. we want the gun in a position to scrap, right? Whether it's ballistically or to beat the snot out of somebody with it. So when we come up to a threshold, if we made the determination that we're going to enter this room, we'll talk about by ourselves first, but again, I really want to harp on the reality that encouraging a minimum of 2. So we make entry. There's 2 steps that we'll talk about. So orienting of the gun, we're looking just over top of the sights. We don't want to be looking through the sights. Looking over top to collect as much information as possible. We want the muzzle as close to the threshold as possible without over penetrating. Sometimes what happens is we get set up really far away, we make the commitment to enter. Now we got to take either multiple steps or one large step to get into the threshold. So by getting our muzzle as close to the threshold as possible with the gun in the upright position, looking over top of the sights, we have a penetration step and a power step. So the penetration step is essentially when we get into the threshold, we've made our assessment. Depending on what we see in our snapshot, what we can see in this particular case is the majority of the room is on the right-hand side. So this would be referred to as our strong side, just given the fact that there's nothing in there that draws our attention, but the larger portion of the room is on the right, so that would drive our attention to the right. So now that we're in the threshold, we have a penetration step which says my brain has committed to going to the right. The penetration step is orient our foot in the direction that we want to go. And then our second step is what's referred to as a power step, where when we commit to breaking the threshold, we want our power step to be in a position where we have a bend in the knees, and then now we have the ability to drive into that.
Were any of you a part of that conversation on Instagram when it became, there's things on Instagram that become fads to talk about, or becomes like, oh, this is the conversation amongst tactics and training at the moment. And it comes and goes. I think this one has been brought up several times and people talked about it for a while, is footwork and CQB. And that seems to be like what he's going over here. He's talking about these different steps. And this is a former JTF2 assaulter, which I believe is Canadian, if I'm not mistaken. And so, you know, the footwork thing was never taught to me. It was just something I learned while doing it, because there's certain things that have to happen and your feet can only be in a certain place when that's happening. So I don't necessarily disagree with talking about the, you know, footwork, but for me, it's just not something that I ever had to, you know, train per se. And when you get new people doing CQB that haven't done it before, they get kind of not made fun of, but it's kind of like funny, I guess, to like watch them move around because they're doing all kinds of weird things. And I think that's more or less because they just don't understand the concepts that they should be achieving, and not necessarily because they don't know where to put their foot, because putting your foot in certain places, having to try to think about that, in my opinion, is a little bit more difficult than understanding, hey, when you cross the threshold, you should have already determined, or before you cross threshold, which direction you're going, and your body armor needs to be facing that direction as soon as your body starts crossing the threshold. So how do we do that, right? And when you think about it that way, you can figure this out in your house pretty quickly, that there's really only maybe, well, I know of one way, but maybe a couple ways to kind of get that done and get it done efficiently. And then also drilling that and being able to do it well. There will still be times where, I don't want to say you're off foot, but you can do something unorthodox and still get the job done because maybe the guy in front of you paused, or maybe he juked right and then went left, so it kind of messed you up.
Corner that we made the commitment. All right, so with a little bit of speed, gun is up as the number 1. Enter, snapshot, determination, penetration step, power step, drive. And what you'll notice is the sooner that we have the gun in that corner and we dig in our corner, the sooner we can make an assessment if there's somebody there. Read the hands. If they're armed, they go down. If they're unarmed, now we need to make the determination, keep moving, but be prepared to scrap with this thing. All right, so this is the first drill that we're going to practice. 1-man entry, head up, gun up. Now, as I enter, what I'll ask you guys to do is follow suit here. Because I am by myself, which is unrealistic, I'll just show you a way that I would crack this nut if I was by myself, okay? So as you guys come over here, you'll see me make entry, and I'll get you guys to go on the inside so you can see it as well. So muzzle really close to the threshold, take that step, snapshot, penetration step, Power step, there's nothing. Right away, I would continue to open my arc, open up the hips, and I'm checking my 6. This would not be optimal. However, we have to have a solution to a problem should we be by ourselves.
So pay attention to this because I put out a video on the channel. If you haven't seen it, you can go find it. I don't remember the title of it. It's something about CQB tactics, basics, or something like that. But towards the end of the video, I basically talk about, I had the Israeli soldier on the podcast. I got to get him back on the new channel so we can talk about a number of things. But one of the things that he had brought up there was, people talk about this if you're solo in a CQB, or even not, right? If you have a 2-man, but in law enforcement, good chance you're gonna be by yourself, or at least have somebody with you who has no idea what they're doing. So you're basically by yourself. And one of the things that he talked about was people say that you have a 50-50 chance of, they say that if you're by yourself, 50-50 chance go left, 50-50 chance you go right. And I think when people hear that, it kind of makes them feel like, well, I have a 50-50 chance at being right, winning, right? And the truth is that you actually just don't win in that situation, right? Especially if we're in a scenario where we're not pre-shooting or pre-firing corners as we're taking them. We don't have any diversionary devices, flashbangs. We don't have grenades, right? When the standard exists, which is a person with a gun waiting to shoot you, it doesn't matter if he's on the left or the right, you're going to get shot. And if he's behind you, you're going to get probably shot a lot more. And if he's in front of you, you're going to get shot at first. And whether or not you're still available to deliver rounds at him, is to be determined. But really, it's just a 50-50 chance that he's in front of you versus behind you. That's what it is. And so I do that video where I set up cameras in opposite corners, and I explain to you what they commonly teach in CQB when you're by yourself, which is what he's about to show you here, which is basically make entry into the room, check what's immediately in front of you, and then turn around and check what's behind you. And he actually has some type of marking rounds here, or I think he has ammunition, so I think he's going to shoot at a target that's behind him. But just think about that. Think about him making entry and going one way. The guy's not there. He turns around. The time it takes him to turn around and shoot at a target. Well, when the guy is like this, waiting for you to come through the threshold, you're not even going to make it probably a step towards the corner that you're actually going. So it's kind of all bad. And so what I show is you should consider whether or not peeking the corner from the threshold is a better option. And I demonstrate why that probably is. And another consideration that I didn't show in the video, but I actually have body cam of me doing this. I was searching an apartment for, well, I guess it was a vacant apartment. And, people were in there, weren't supposed to be in there. So we had to go in there and search in there. Me and one other person went in there, and because that's just the way that it is. And, there's a room immediately to the left and a bathroom, and then you go and there's a living area that's open, then the kitchen, and then there's a patio. And basically the one officer found the guy out on the patio inside the closet, right? So I hear him yelling at the guy, so I stop focusing on what I'm supposed to be doing, which is covering this area, and go help him. Because, what are you going to do, right? And I had to, basically force this guy into handcuffs for him, right? So, but then after that happened, I went and continued to clear the apartment, and I approached a doorway that led to a bedroom. But I think it was the bathroom, or there was an adjoining room to the main room that I was looking at. So it was basically a corner-fed room. So straight in front of me was a wall to the left. I couldn't see that corner. That was basically the only thing I couldn't see. And to the right, along that wall, there's just an opening for another room. And so most people would say, well, it's corner-fed, right? So run the rabbit. So that if there's a guy in that corner, he's tracking you. And by the way, these people were supposed to be armed. Okay. And so, you have time to stand there and look at it. Okay, what is actually the best choice here? Well, if I run the rabbit, I'm putting myself closer. Yeah, I'm focusing on that corner as I'm moving, but I'm putting myself closer to another opening, right? So that I have to do that, check that, and then I go like this. And now I'm back looking at this opening right here, which I don't like, right? At that point, now I'd have to come back around the the room to kind of take a wider angle, or I could go directly towards that threat. That's also not good. So if I'm L-shaped room, wall, and to the left is that corner I haven't seen. And if I go to the unknown, well, one, I could be face to face with the guy with a gun, but two, as I move along that wall, I'm also exposing myself to this other room. And so what would be better? Well, in my opinion, it would be better to peek that corner from the threshold, determine, okay, there's nobody there. Now I can work this other separate problem that I was never exposed to, if that makes sense. No good way to take a T-shaped intersection by yourself. No, I mean, what you have to do is you have to approach the intersection on one side. So that would just depend on the information that you have, what you're hearing, and maybe you have none and you're just searching. So, you know, you come up to that T intersection, you check down one way, you don't see anything out of the, you know, ordinary, and then you come back around and you check down the other way, and then you make a decision to go from there. But when you are checking these ways, you kind of want to do that quickly because somebody could be walking up behind you and you don't know that there is. So
that we have the gun in that corner and we dig in our corner, the sooner we can make an assessment if there's somebody there. Read the hands. If they're armed, they go down. If they're unarmed, now we need to make the determination, keep moving, but be prepared to scrap with this thing. All right, so this is the first drill that we're going to practice. One-man entry, head up, gun up. Now, as I enter, what I'll ask you guys to do is follow suit here. Because I am by myself, which is unrealistic, I'll just show you a way that I would crack this nut if I was by myself, okay? So as you guys come over here, you'll see me make entry, and I'll get you guys to go on the inside so you can see it as well. So muzzle really close to the threshold, take that step, snapshot, penetration step, power step, there's nothing. Right away, I would continue to open my arc, open up the hips, and I'm checking my 6. This would not be optimal, however, we have to have a solution to a problem should we be by ourselves. So first one, just watch the feet, muzzle's close to the threshold.
I actually prefer, though, if I am going to do this, check right and then just pivot straight 180 backwards and snap that direction. It's faster, in my opinion, and there's no reason for you to sweep the entire room again because you've already cleared that when you walk through the door.
Threshold, take that breath of courage, making a determination, penetration step, power step, drive nothing, and then we're opening up our hips. And you notice I'm keeping my feet in motion. I already know that this wall's here. There's nothing for my attention to be here. Quick snapshot, ensure my back is covered, and then we start to systematically, logically think about how we would lick the rest of this up. Power step,
Watch
drive nothing.
And I'm nitpicking here, but the mindset should be this.
Penetration step, power step, drive.
Boom. I've checked my corner. There's nothing there. I'm already moving to check what's behind me, if I was going to do it that way.
Drive nothing. And then we're opening up our hips, and you notice I'm keeping my feet in motion. I already know that this wall's here. There's nothing for my attention to be here. Quick snapshot, ensure my back is covered, and then we start to systematically, logically think about how we would lick the rest of this up. Right? So one more time, pay attention to the fire.
I think that there is a cultural stigma that the peaking idea when you're by yourself that instructors don't want to acknowledge, right? Because I just feel like there's no way that you could tell somebody to enter a room this way by themselves, and that's like the best way of doing it if they actually considered and drilled and thought about just peeking the corner because you're by yourself and making a decision whether you want to stay there or you want to disengage, in my opinion, is better than entering face to face with a shooter and having really no options. Clarify this. Are you saying that people that have their sight on target make identification errors more often than people at the low ready, I believe is what you're saying?
All right, so threshold analogy, as close to the threshold as possible without protruding past. Make that determination. Breath of courage, the gun's hot. Enter, I don't see anything yet. Penetration step, dig it, nothing. Open up the arc, and then safe the gun. All right, muzzle's close to the threshold. We step in, snapshot, penetration step, power step, nothing, and then I'm opening up the gun. What I'm trying to avoid is this. There's nothing. oh shit, there's something. Because literally, even though that's, let's say, a quarter of a second, that could be the difference between getting shot in the back. So head is up.
That's a good one. When you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That's funny. That's kind of the mentality of a lot of people. I would have to look at where they're getting these statistics from, and I would argue that the statistics couldn't possibly be correct if they're utilizing law enforcement as the basis for that. If you want to run a study on whether or not this is true, you have to do it with trained individuals, and you have to tell them exactly what you want. Okay, so for example, I don't know, you want to use me, you want to use SWAT guys, whoever you want to use some special forces guys, whatever, and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Okay, we want to test whether or not you can identify the target or have an issue identifying the target in these different situations. And let me tell you why using police officers as the example is a terrible idea. Okay, and that is because you cannot say that officers make poor decisions with gunfire when they have their sights on target because they can't see what the target is, but then also acknowledge that most cops never find their sights anyways, okay? So more often than not, that is an excuse that's just used because let's say you shoot somebody you're not supposed to. I mean, you got to come up with something. You got to say something, right? Well, I couldn't quite see because, it's crazy to me. Like, look at the officers, the times they shoot things they're not supposed to shoot or make it's an emotional problem, okay? Because what you can do is use somebody in your household, okay? Have them, if you have a fake gun, that's the best thing to use, and use your rifle or use your handgun. And I want you to say, hey, go 7 yards in that room and stand there and tell them where you want them to hold the gun. Obviously, clear and all that. Use fake guns if you have to, or airsoft guns. But get behind your sights and tell me at what position that person has to be in and where they have to be holding the gun for you to not see it with both eyes open. And it's going to be aggravating for you to do that because you're probably, like I did it with my son, and I got tired holding my rifle there, trying to figure out what position he had to actually be in and where he had to stand for me to not be able to see the gun. And so I imagine that they're using law enforcement officers who make bad decisions with gunfire to say, oh, that's because they're looking down their sights. They just don't look down their sights. That's why they shoot a lot and they miss. Okay, because if you were actually looking through your sights when engaging targets, you would shoot at a pace that makes sense based on what your target is doing, based on what you're seeing in your sights. And so I have to look at the, study. But if you want to test this, if they want to do it properly, use trained people and have them, say, hey, I want you to search through your sights, okay? And just see how often or how many times they have, they engage the wrong target because they couldn't see, and it's going to be never. And by the way, if I come up on a target and you'll see this, right? And I think he's actually doing this, right? So let's see.
Penetration step, power step.
So I guess maybe he isn't, because maybe he knows there isn't a target there.
Nothing.
But look at this, right? As soon as he turned that direction, he's behind his sights. He's looking through his sights. Okay. Now maybe he got his eyes around slightly faster.
Penetration step, power step, drop.
He knows there's nothing there, so he's not looking through his sights probably here.
I'm nothing.
So yeah, he does see it here, and now he's coming up on his sights. So, but there's videos that I've put out where I show special forces guys making entry, and as soon as they're breaking the threshold, they're behind their sights. In a situation where a guy has a gun pointed at you, you don't have time to do a ready up drill, okay? Tenths of seconds matters. And if you haven't, I kind of showed this in the debunking Special Forces CQB, I think, part 1, where, crossing the threshold and actually being able to engage a target, how difficult that is to do when all the situation and the circumstances are unknown to you. But if you happen to cross the threshold, and by the way, people aren't always standing up straight like a paper target. They're under things. they're ducking down, they're laying down behind a couch. So it's not like we're the mentality of, oh, I know this is a paper target right here, so I want to be on my sights. It's just about being ready sooner. And I don't believe that you actually lose the ability to clearly identify if you have both eyes open. And if you did, where you turn the corner or you do that and you see a person, but you can't see their hand, what are you going to do? You're going to maneuver the gun just slightly enough down to let whatever it is so that you can see, right? So, I mean, you could argue even at a low ready, or even let's say you come in and you're not behind your sights.
Penetration step, power step, drive.
So where would a person have to be in this situation with a handgun for him to not be able to see his hand? Well, what if the person's down here, crouched down like this? Could he see him? No. I mean, I would argue it's the same, whether he's in a low ready looking over his sights like this and the guy's down here versus if the gun's, closer to his eye, kind of. That makes sense. So this is something I want to really explore more in depth. The thing that I struggle with on making a video about it is you can't show the eye's perspective. So I haven't really figured out how to demonstrate it and show it properly where people kind of get the idea of where that makes sense. Because putting my camera up behind my optic, not the same, right? Peeking is the way. You are the only one who is teaching currently on one-man CQB. He should prove that with force on force. Well, here's the thing. A lot of the thing. Well, I don't just make anything up, okay? I am somewhat concerned about me making a video about something, and I don't want to say being wrong, and I don't even want to say putting bad information out there, but I have kind of thought through it enough to believe that it would be difficult for someone to make a video to the contrary of the thing that I'm talking about, right? And there's a reason why you haven't seen one, okay? They might pick something out of a video that I happen to execute wrong in that moment, but to overall concept, I would love to see it. Okay. Let's take the rifle under the arm walking past the threshold, for example. I've made 2 videos about it. I've talked about it in depth. I've done the best analytical approach to it as I, kind of could. And if we're going to say that it is a reasonable idea for you to bypass open doors in a hallway, left, right, to get to where the threat is. Let's just eliminate the threat. Let's just competency level, ability to actually engage targets that way, at that speed, right? Let me set up targets in a room, and whoever thinks they can do it, let's do it. But you're never going to see that happen, okay? Because people that demonstrated it, that are supposed to be the best, okay, they will fail. And that's a problem, okay? Because when they do it, and I prove that they can't do it, that's a problem. And it's not a problem. It's a problem that they don't want to have to face the realities of. Very simple. Most of the things that I teach, you can test on yourself to determine whether or not they make sense. So, if I give you 14 rounds of simunition and I say, here's a hallway, there's a door, alternating left, right, however, maybe it's left, open doors, rooms we don't know what the inside of the rooms are. We don't know what the layout is because we've never been in this building before because we're responding to an active shooter, okay? So you're just going to show up, to use your rifle simunition. I'm going to say, you're going to bypass these doors. You're going to utilize that technique. And I want you to clearly identify where the target is, what the target is doing, whether it's a shoot or a not shoot, no shoot target. And I want you to engage if you feel like you need to, and, don't engage if you don't, but I want you to keep walking by all the doors. And let's count up the rounds where they hit on these targets and missed, and let's show people. I think that would be great. But there's a lot of things that people, a lot of these things can be demonstrated on a whiteboard, but people generally want to say, just like this. By the way, I like this guy. Nothing wrong with what he's doing. I just think that this is the cultural expectation. But somebody mentioned it here in the chat. Would they say something about he should prove that with force on force? And yeah, I mean, let's do that. I don't think we really need to, but most people are going to be like, yeah, you're shot a lot in the back and then you're already dead and there's no turning around. And likewise, if we say, okay, you're going to go to the right, there's a person to the right, we're not going to tell you whether or not that person is a shoot or a no shoot, so you're going to have to make that decision, and we want you to shoot him before he shoots you. Well, nobody's going to be able to do that. Sometimes you'll even have people make wrong decisions on whether it's a threat or not because they want to be faster, right? And then you just do a bunch of runs where you're peaking. And the problem is that people default to is people will go, oh, well, this is simunition, and simunition doesn't go through walls, and they would just shoot through walls. Well, people don't just shoot through walls. It doesn't happen, okay? Sometimes they hit the wall in conjunction with actually hitting the threshold or shooting at the threshold, but they don't deliberately shoot through walls instead. Why? Because, as human beings, modern human beings who all live inside of structures and have been in, go inside of buildings every single day, the place where we expect people to be when the door is being moved or people are outside the door is somewhere near the door, okay? That's also why suspects wait until the door is either being moved or they're walking through the threshold to start shooting, okay? Because rounds do things when they hit things other than you before they get to you. Yeah, this is just demonstrating a technique, not a scenario, really. So don't, that's why I'm not, because in reality, if this was real, if this was a real thing, I wouldn't even go to the right, because from where he's at, the only piece that he can't see outside is this tiny little sliver right here. And I mean, you could see enough where you're like, okay, there's not a dude standing there. So he's just demonstrating a technique, because if you were approaching this one man, you would look at the whole room, basically go, yeah, there's nobody there. Let me come back over to the side of the door. Let me check this way. Okay, my greatest threat is right here. Okay, so at a minimum, if you were going to make entry into this room, you would focus that direction where the threat is, because giving up your back is not a great idea. So it's just demonstrating a technique, not reality.
I'm nothing, and then we're opening up our hips, and you notice I'm keeping my feet in motion. I already know that this wall's here. There's nothing for my attention to be here. Quick snapshot, ensure my back is covered, and then we start to systematically, logically think about how we would lick the rest of this up, right? So one more time, pay attention to the firearm on this one. All right, so threshold analogy, as close to the threshold as possible.
So you guys see that right there, what he's looking at? You see just this little sliver right here? Do we really think that somebody would be standing there? I mean, if you had to bet money, I would say no. And it wouldn't be something that I'm concerned with. And so actually, and also these doors here, they don't open all the way, because back where he is standing beneath him is like a door stop that's on the ground. So I'm assuming this door has a door stop and it's pushed all the way to the door. So let me ask you guys this. If you were by yourself and this door is open right here, and you've checked this direction and you've checked center, what would you do at this point? What are your options here? I would also say that if this was if you know there's no other openings in the room, if you know there's no other openings in this room, like you can see the room, it's the last room, maybe a closet or something, but there's no doorways leading to other rooms. Would it be better to go the direction of where the guy is, potentially, the only direction, or actually do the thing that you shouldn't do in CQB, which is push to the middle of the room, because in that way you're actually moving laterally and not parallel to the wall, either away from the threat or towards the threat, right? Or is it better to go towards the threat? So that's another thing that should be considered. If it's the last room, you can see most of it except the hard corners to the left. Why would you push directly towards the threat when you can push, if you could push through the room quickly through the threshold and have that person try to track you? Like when I put out content and I talk about this stuff, I'm talking mainly in a law enforcement setting, because people in combat situations inside of structures, in wars is like a completely different thing. I mean, they'll do a lot of things, right? But also to the point of that, right? It's like, would you rather have somebody take guesses through a wall that you can't do anything about anyways? Okay. If you're moving towards the door that's to the right, whether it's open or closed, and he hears you and starts shooting through the wall, what can you do about that? Can't do anything. And so, you know, you have to ask yourself a lot of the time, well, what is the alternative to being shot through a wall? Well, a lot of the time when people are advocating for that as a problem that you have to navigate, the only alternative is to get into the room where the guy can see you, right? And so that just, in my opinion, can't be better. There's cover, right? Then there's concealment. And just because it's concealment doesn't mean it doesn't afford you the thing that concealment is supposed to afford you, which is the ability for somebody to identify exactly where you are and more accurately put more rounds on you. Okay, that's a reason why cover and concealment is still taught. So by identifying something as concealment, you're not telling me that it isn't affording me the thing that concealment is supposed to. But I get your point.
One very important aspect of this training, identification. If we will not train in slice-based entries the idea of identification, the chance that you will be conditioned to shoot people as soon as you see them when you feel a little bit stressed is really high. Therefore, in slice-based entries, one of the factors we have always to be aware of is the whole story of identification. If a soldier or police officer isn't trained properly with identification, he will be tempted through the high stress and the static movement to put rounds at any kind of a human figure that he will see. And why? Because the first thing you see from the human body when you slice is probably the hand spheres, a little bit of the shoulder, and only then the face. So normally if someone wants to shoot you, only when you really see the body, you can identify him. Sometimes maybe here, but you get the point, right? You saw it in the demonstration before. Identification, identification. Is that clear? Okay, let's go, guys. Get your safety gear. Let's go. Let's go. And up. Ready? You know the target? Let's move. Okay, let's work. Ignore the doors, they're not in game.
Okay, so for whatever reason, and I don't know, I mean, I need more information. I don't know. This is the one thing that I really don't like that Israelis teach and do. Like, I would be doing all this from damn near behind my sights. Like, this gun is pointed, you know, low ready, I guess you could say, right? At the moment in which somebody sees you and starts engaging you, you're not even going to get up onto the gun, probably. I wonder what... And by the way, let's just all keep in mind that this is training, so these people are learning.
And next room, let's go.
I just don't know what made him come up from pointing at the ground to kind of like a more of a low ready.
Hey! Drop your weapon! Drop your weapon! Yeah, very good. How was it for you?
Working from the stairs was kind of difficult because I have long barrel and long arms.
Yeah.
But I feel safe with system because I have always kind of cover or concealment. Was good.
Okay. You see how much you're breathing? You're not even running more than like 50 meters, right?
Yeah.
You see, it's just a stress. You saw the difference between positive to negative corner fed, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Good work. Did you get hit?
I didn't get hit.
You guys got hit, right?
Yes.
Both threads?
On this arm and on the maternal.
Okay. That's awesome.
Chest and face. Bang.
You guys are feeling good? All good? Safe-wise? Everything is fine? Okay, good. Next, guys. Let's go. Very good. Go!
Drop the weapon!
Okay, next room, here.
In my next video, I'm going to
And reset.
incorporate
Are you
some
injured? Anything?
combat footage from
Did you get hit?
Yes.
You okay?
this guy,
Okay.
Project Gecko.
Where did you get hit? Okay, good. You didn't get hit, huh? A few words. How was it for you, the drill?
Very good. So running a little bit more stress. So and then have to work with the weak side of the door.
Yeah.
But only shift the weapon. Not a fan of all the fancy transitions and stuff like this.
Okay. Yeah.
But it works. I think
It works really good.
treating also works for my left shoulder
Yeah.
with my shooting.
Also, what you did here was good. You shifted. You see, this is initiative already, right? I don't need to teach you that. You do it already because you see it, you understand it. You realize in time and space that you were really vulnerable here, so you just shifted to the 90 over here. You just copied the same principles here to this side of the door, which is perfect. The system is all about that, understanding behavior and being compliant with it, okay? So that's really good. I mean, no other words. You see it works. Okay, let's do the next, guys. Let's go. Good work.
Let's see what happened on that. I missed it. I don't think he switched shoulders with his rifle. I think it's in his strong side, his right side. Which, this is the problem of that. The suspect is in an angle of attack before you can be in an angle of attack, which really means that you cannot possibly deliver rounds on him and he can see you and do that. There was on the previous channel, Kinetic Clips, there's a video that I did on the IDF inside of a building. It's the one where the soldier is fighting two, at least, terrorists. He drops one in the center of the room, kind of, was probably coming at him. I think he eats a grenade, and then after the grenade goes off, he gets up and he starts pushing through the living room and getting to like a hard corner to the right. And luckily, and I demonstrate in that video pretty good the angle of attack. The terrorist was not prepared for him to come around the corner and was, I think, doing something with his gun, like looking down at his gun or something. And the terrorist actually still got rounds off before the soldier did, but he didn't hit him. So the soldier had to take, an extra half a step or, a couple more degrees of an angle before he could actually hit him. And all of that you don't see if you just watch the original video. You don't see that happen. You have to slow it down, because when I watched it the first couple of times, I didn't realize that the terrorists actually got rounds off on him. And those first rounds are where you win or lose, right? We can't bank on, I hope that he just doesn't hit me, right? So we could have got rounds. He could have got rounds on that guy sooner had he switched shoulders. He's being shot at, and sure, if he stayed there, maybe he could engage him. But two things you have to consider. One, the suspect moving deeper inside the room, which means you would have to continue to expose yourself to chase him down. And two, if you're actually taking rounds, you're not going to continue to push. Your physiological response to stress, which I believe is what happens here, is going to cause you to, flinch down, to duck, And you can minimize that, but you can't really, absolutely 100% avoid it. Yeah, so John just said what I just said. I didn't read that before I said that, but yep, exactly. See, that's what he did right there. And these are not real rounds, okay? This is training. We know that these aren't going to actually hurt us. And this is a situation where you are no longer safe here at all, okay? Okay, I saw you at the threshold, bang, bang, I just shot you. At you, you ducked back. This whole area right here is now becoming a prime location to eat rounds.
Okay, next room from here. Okay.
Now he has it in his shoulder. They're obviously like trying this and working this technique, but it looks like he's going to have a hard time finding his sights, even if he wants to. Just see kind of what happens. He may have.
And ceasefire. All right. Where did you get hit? You got hit somewhere.
On the thumb.
Okay. But you saw how, even though you fucked up and not really, and the guy was able to put one bullet to your direction,
Yeah.
automatically you flinched because you saw him coming, right? As soon as you flinched, that shot went through, only managed to get your finger, but not the rest of your body, because there were follow-up shots, right? He shot several shots.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what saved your life, that fail-safe of reflex.
Yeah.
That's what we talked about, right?
And somebody asked me this in one of the classes, more recent classes that I taught on exploiting accuracy. I basically do something very similar to this. And one of the students asked me, because he did that where the guy came out and he flinched, and he asked if that was bad, and I said, I'm not going to tell you it's bad, because that guy could be shooting at you in that moment, and the fact that you flinched, right before the rounds went off, caused him to actually miss and shoot where you were. Bad guys are not aiming, okay, for the most part. Very occasionally, it's very obvious they are, but for the most part, especially with handguns, they're just doing the same thing cops are doing usually.
Right. It was a little bit dangerous over there. Here you got it really right. That was good.
Yeah.
Shoulder transition is something else. We don't need to discuss it now. But right here it was better, because then you started to shift from one apex to the other, and you tried to get a little bit more concealment and all of this. So it was good. Is to open it gently, and by doing so, the door will stop around 90 to 150 degrees. Now, since I'm alone, we talked about it, I'm exposed to a variety of angles. And one of the problems with slice, when you work alone, that the more you slice and slice, the more you start to give away. By having the door like this, you offer yourself concealment. Yes, I know if someone will be there, he could shoot me through the door, but then already I will see it from this angle, because I will hear the movement, maybe I will see a shadow, or maybe he will start moving, because he wants to see as well. If he sees the door and he can't see me, he will go around it. You get the point? But this comes into play in situations where I'm standing like this. It gives me this concealment buffer, in case when someone else comes into the room while I'm standing here. Everything is done quickly, and the consumption of the angles in the room is done inside. Meaning, instead of trying to see the room from outside, I'm literally going inside and I'm solving problem while being inside of the room, okay? Then we have the other way of clearing rooms, which is basically slice-based entries. Probably the majority of you are familiar with that, with terms like slicing the pie, incremental pie, sliding doors, stuff like this. In slice-based entries, basically the majority of the clearance is done from outside of the room, meaning we try to avoid overcommitting the room until we really have to. Okay, so for example, if I can clear 80% from outside, I will do it, and only then I will go inside. Those are the two main concepts we have. One is favoring movement, the other one is favoring safety. Between the two concepts, we have hybrid entries. Hybrid entries are basically, for example, entries like you slice 50% from outside and then you go dynamically into the room, or stuff like the incremental pi, where people will do rainbow around the door and then will crisscross inside, okay? But primarily, slice-based entries, dynamic-based entries. So first of all, threshold, that's the frame of the entry point, okay? It may dictate how fast I can go through it, and it may dictate how much I can control or expose for myself. Make sense? In daily life or reality, I have 3 types of thresholds: tight, standard, wide. Let's go through it really quick. Standard, I think it's pretty clear to everybody, but a tighter threshold will allow me to see little into the room, and it will not allow me to move 2 people at once through the doorway. Make sense? Good. Fun fact, the corners, which the hard corners, are becoming even deeper, because from here I can slice less and less from the room, okay? But you will see it later. Then we have the wide threshold. The wide thresholds are allowing us to move faster into the room with 2 people, even 3 people. It is easier to slice and control, but the only big issue that we have is that with the wider threshold, since I can see so much, I'm also losing much faster. Because, for example, if I'm slicing from here all the way here, due to the fact that the threshold is much longer, I have much more information which is away, which is in peripheral view, and at some point I'm losing, okay? You'll see it later. It's actually very interesting in forms and force. The next type of structure that we have is what we call a tubular shape or linear, okay? I think it's self-explanatory, so I will ask you the following question. Where do we have it in daily life? Buses, very good. Trains, trams,
Planes.
airplanes, very good, okay? And of course tunnels, which is in Israel also is a really big topic, right? Okay, let's go through it really quick. The first issue I have with tubular rooms is the fact that it's a compressed environment. Okay, as you can see, it's a very narrow environment. Normally also, it will be relatively free in the middle because obviously people have to move from A to B. However, it's still compressed, which means if we will fight while running into this room, a lot of guns will be compressed together, okay? So the probability of friendly fire is pretty high. Second issue that we have is that essentially, you have only 2 directions of fire, like we talked about the L shape. Fun fact, an L shape, technically, even if it's a fatter room, it's basically 2 tubular shapes together. You get it? Perception. Okay, 2 directions of fire. Next issue that we have, I actually covered it already. There is no structural or furniture cover or concealment. And the next issue that we have, especially with inexperienced people, is the issue of overpressure and friendly fire. By overpressure, I'm referring to a situation where someone is shooting next to me. Individuals, especially in a police environment, who are not used to it, for them it might be too much. It will be a really high contributor for stress when they will experience it for the first time when they're fighting someone. Because after all, when someone's shooting next to you, especially when you don't have like this fancy ear protection, it's not so comfortable, right? Second, in terms of friendly fire, again, we're looking here into a high probability of shooting each other as people are simply too close to each other, okay? Let's talk about direction of opening or mechanism, okay? We have 2 directions of opening, okay? Push, pull. Push as of the door goes into the room, okay? He just went inside, but okay. Then we have pull, which means the door will go outside to me. So inward, outward. Make sense? Remember it as push-pull. Okay? Perfect. Fun fact regarding corridors, normally, by far, doors will open into the rooms rather than away from the room. Why? Because corridors and staircases are highways of buildings, okay? They're used for mobility. Just keep it in mind, fun fact, okay? Good. Let's do a quick summary. So we have 3 types of room shapes which have consistency in reality, right? Good. Before we will summarize them visually on the wall, I want to ask you for those shapes. What are those? Box shaped? L shape? Tubular shape. What is an easy corner?
Where you can see the corner from outside.
From outside, you can fight it, you can bail it and so on. What is a or the door basically, okay? So it's more easier language-wise. Okay, primarily when we're looking into this working space, I have a weak side and I have a strong side. And this concept of strong and weak side is oriented around the idea, how fast am I becoming exposed to any angle in the room from the moment the door is being interacted. So for example, 42, come here. you will be like, let's say, right here, okay? Okay, good. He is right now on the weak side. Anyone knows why? Let me show you. From the moment that me as a teammate whatsoever, or he will open the door, and let's say the door is still here. Can anyone see him? No, correct? So he has time to get control on the gun again, to bring the hand back, right? Long story short, it will take quite a long time until he will become exposed to the angles inside the room, okay? So, weak side. Put your hand on the handle. Just open it. You see, by the time he's opening, he's still not exposed for anything, and he has the time to regain control on the weapon and be prepared. Weak side, okay? Why do we call it the weak side? Because in the end, in a bigger team capacity, it means that if I'm standing here, I'm not able to react to the room as fast as possible. Because in the end, when I'm opening a door, it doesn't matter what context, you trigger the room in one way or another. Make sense? Okay. Okay, guys, I know that probably it's going to be very clear to you, but I would like to go through the level of danger that the individual can experience as he clear L shapes. Again, it will be pretty simple and logical, but the reason why I want to go through it is because I think it's really important for you to understand what level of danger means what to me, okay? So let's imagine that you breach the door over here, it's broken. Over there you throw a nuclear bomb, everybody are dead. And the only thing you need to clear is this area and that area. Make sense? Good. Windows are out of the game, just to make it simple. Okay, good. As I'm entering the room, and let's say I am standing here, this area is still what we consider to be green-wise safe. It's still relatively safe for me. Why?
I dominated.
I can still dominate. I can still maybe work here from the doorway, all right? What else? Reaction time, right? I still have a better reaction. I'm going to open the door. You see how quick the light comes out, right? From the moment the door is interacted and slightly opened, he can start working, okay? So strong and weak side. Why is it important to define it? Thank you. For the following reason. It's important to understand that limited penetration or any kind of slice-based entries are basically an ambush in motion. And for many years, across many units, the doors were just kicked or just open and people ran through it. The way I see it, these doors are concealment, they are not cover, but they can allow me to manipulate the angles to my needs. So for example, later in bigger capacities, one of the things we do is the following. 42, come over here. So for example, if I'm standing here and I know that there is such a thing as a weak and strong side, I know that the guy who's opening here is able to open it, and from here the guys who's standing here can walk through as fast as possible. While here I have the time to regain my weapon, and so on and so on. Okay, thank you. Makes sense until now? This is really important because for years we saw it that across different units that either they just opened doors or just kicked it and ran through it. And often in force and force, as soon as resistance starts around the door, you'll see guys standing like this or whatsoever, and then they're getting hit. Okay, so this is really important. We want to set ourselves to success. Make sense? Perfect. So, weak side, as of I am coming from the handle side, I'm opening the door, and the door is still in front of me, provides me concealment. Strong side means I'm away from the device that allows me to open the door, in this case it's the handle, and from the moment the door is opened, I can see into the room. Make sense? And when I can see, someone else can see me as well. Good. Okay, let's talk about door interaction in a one-man capacity. So in other words, we're going back to the one-man room clearance, but with doors. So right now, just for a second, ignore the rest of the doors here and windows and so on, and think about you working in this corridor and you needing to clear this room. Okay, so you have to clear it, but the door is closed, right? We didn't talk about it. So I have two ways of clearing this room. Either I'm going to kick it or just open it and do my thing, or I can manipulate it to my need. Now here it's even more important than a four-man capacity clearance. And why? Because I'm alone. If I'm alone, what kind of a problem I'm facing?
I have to do two things in one, like open door and still secure myself.
Exactly, 360 plus working my objective, correct? What other kind of problems do I have when I work alone?
Outnumbered.
Outnumbered, okay. Good. So I have to be very selective in how much commitment I give to the problems at hand. Make sense? Good. Okay. In the following procedure, what I...
Let me see. As of door procedures to account for when the outside is lighted and the inside is dark, is it a good idea to turn on your light on so that the door is open? You already have information to flow in. You're talking about your weapon light? Because I assume so. So if you can't see, you have to throw light. Okay, just period. Like there's no questions about that at all. And so there's an officer on our department that was killed in this very way. He had a handheld light, but I think they were actually discussing at the door how they couldn't see. Where was this? Oh, the more recent video. This will answer your question. Go watch the more recent, actually, it's the most recent video that I did. It's a law enforcement. They're inside the apartment and they're shooting a lot. This is the exact problem that he has. He's inside a well-lit room because of all the sun, and the bathroom has no windows inside the apartment, and that's where the bad guy is. And because the officer doesn't have a weapon light, you know, basically is what it boils down to. He's not standing there focused on the area with a weapon light, and he can't see. He's looking at a dark spot. So what happens is I slow it down, I freeze it, I highlight it. The suspect obviously exposed, but you can't see him because you see his muzzle flash, and the round goes through the wall 1 foot to the officer's left. And you have to light it up. You have to be able to identify when you're at a tactical disadvantage in that moment, and you can use your weapon light to a certain degree to deny a person, you know, the ability or the want to do things, right? Because if I'm a bad guy in a bathroom and it's dark and I see there's a weapon light just steady pointed at where I'm at. Well, if I'm standing there in the dark and I can see where the light is, I'm just going to inherently assume that where the light is danger, right? So I'm not going to want to put myself in that position. Certainly not going to want to take my time and line up a shot. So you have to have a bad weapon light. Like, so I think it's going to be not this video, but the next video. Well, I say that. I already have it all like written up and everything. I just need to record it, and it's going to be pretty much about your weapon light. I'm not going to get into why I prefer to have a weapon light with a narrow beam. That's a whole nother conversation. But I have the best weapon lights that you can buy. I have the Surefire Turbo, and I say the best. I'm sure there's comparable ones. And I have a Mod Light OKW, and to my knowledge, at least on the Mod Light side, it's the most narrow beam that you can have. That's what I prefer for a number of different reasons. Like, you can punch through things, you know, a little bit better. You can see a little bit farther. You can, in my opinion, disorient and distract somebody a little bit better. And I don't believe that you lose the ability to see general area, which is like kind of the argument for wider beams, is that, well, I can just light up a bigger area. I mean, you have to put yourself in situations with the light, and you can stage these to determine, you know, what is and what isn't. Like, let's just say you have, I guess the best example would be like more of a large venue setting. Like, let's just say a school with 75-yard long hallway, doors open on either side, maybe your cafeteria, whatever you want to use. Test different lights, put people in different positions, and see what you can and can't see. And I would find it very, I think it's very uncertain that if I'm training my weapon light on a particular spot, because that's what I want to have lit up, that I wouldn't see somebody else popping up somewhere, right? Because even though it is a narrow beam, there is still enough spill to be able to identify something that pops up. Mindset, tactics, using cover and concealment to get to a successful shooting solution is the only way. You say it repeatedly, and in my life, I do In my life, I do too. Time splits are training tool. And those training tools have supplemented mindset tactics because it feels good, looks cool, gets smacked with, looks cool. Getting smacked with sim rounds hurts the ego, and getting smacked with rounds just sucks. Keep up the great work. Yeah, I think we'll end on this because I want to just talk about this for a second. I mean, yeah, I've said this a number of times. I recorded a podcast that I have to publish on the channel too. I talk about it in that podcast. Point to me the times where officers have been killed or severely injured because their speed reload wasn't 0.9 seconds instead of 2, right? And when I say these things, I don't mean don't push yourself to strive for these things. But, one of the things that people like to say, because it's their thing, so people like to champion on their thing. So practical shooting, whatever it is, they like to, because they're really good at that, and they don't pay any attention to the other stuff, they just like to say, it's the best, and look at me, I'm the best at it. Is they say, well, I don't need to teach cops how to make decisions because that's easy. That comes now. Like, whatever it is they say, it doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't prove itself anywhere. I posted on the Instagram, the newer Instagram, kinetic_concepts1, which is like the more law enforcement related Instagram. The only thing I do on there is point out procedural errors, and then there's the marksmanship side too, that piece that I talk about as well. But on average, cops are making terrible decisions. They're not putting themselves in positions to win. And when the vast majority, like 99% of officers die with their gun in their holster or before they fire a round, and not from ambushes, not because of marksmanship, because they don't know how to identify and mitigate threats. And so if I had to pick, 3 things that officers, or just let's say 2 things that officers, what is the things that are necessary to, ensure that you go home? I mean, marksmanship's not on there. I'm not saying don't do it. It's just like, if you don't identify that you're standing outside a residence, looking inside a dark space, backlit by a lit space, and you're hanging out there and you don't identify the tactical disadvantage that you're in, that you don't have a shield, that you're all the way up as close to the threat as you could possibly be in this moment, that he can see you and you can't see him, well, as somebody has said before, you're just dead. Okay? So forget about marksmanship because you're just laying on the ground. Okay? And that's the reality of it. There's another, so on the Instagram, there's, a unit doing a takedown on a murder suspect in a parking lot. One officer gets out of the vehicle and he has to leave his vehicle for cover. I don't know if he was intending to or not, but in order to see where the suspect is, so suspect vehicle is here, his vehicle kind of turned in here. So in order to see the suspect on the passenger side, he had to get out and walk, right? Which I understand. But instead of, worst case scenario, using the back right of the suspect vehicle to kind of hold that angle as the suspect is like diving back into the passenger seat of the car, or suspect vehicle, officer's vehicle here, there's another vehicle parked like this. The officer could have immediately got out and ran over to that and used that car as cover to say, hey, police, get on the ground. And as the suspect's diving back into his car, you can continue to hold on him. And then, he presents a gun. So let me ask you this. What happens every single time a person's in the open and they start getting shot at? Now, because there's a delay on this, I'm just going to answer it for you. They run, okay? And their marksmanship is non-existent. It's moving to get out of the way because of physiological response to stress, and doing something which usually leads to firing rounds, right? Indiscriminately, kind of. And in that same scenario, one of the other officers on that unit was approaching the suspect vehicle from the front. So suspect vehicle was here. He was on foot coming from this way towards the front of the vehicle, and he had his gun in his holster. He had his gun on his, never have we ever on a tactical unit, identified the person that we're looking for who's wanted, always a felony, and not address that person with, police, get on the ground. Police, get down. Police, get down. With a gun, okay? I mean, we got cops that are putting themselves out in the open to get shot. And that officer did get shot, by the way. could have been avoided or at least significantly mitigated. That round that hit you in the leg could have hit you in the chest, could have hit you in the face. Because you had to turn and run away, subsequent rounds could have hit you here, which is a common place that officers are, shot underneath their vest, right? Up here and then underneath their armpit. And so that's why I'm not like marksmanship. Yeah, you got to be really good at it. You can work on that. But like if you can shoot really well, but you don't understand these tactical situations that you're putting yourself in, and you're just dead. There is no marksmanship. Tactics get you to the point where marksmanship matters, right? So some of you guys have probably seen, like I have a class, high risk vehicle encounters. I teach cops. Well, first I teach them about the likelihood that you're going to hit somebody through your windshield and why it's probably not a good idea, and give them a process to clear their muzzle so that they can get accurate rounds on target faster, be accountable for their marksmanship, and decrease their liability, right? And so, it's not a secret, like just as seeing what the tactic is, I put out videos, me doing it, or even it's part of the class talking about it, right? I think that was on this channel. And if you put somebody who had no idea, okay, and I would love to do this, but it's hard to find people that are willing to do that. Give me somebody that is not a tactics person, that doesn't understand tactics, that is just a great shooter, and I want to put them in a vehicle and just, hey, like, here's this ammunition rifle. Okay, and give them no time to prepare, because you don't have to give me time. You tell me what the scenario is, and I already know what I'm doing because I have developed a familiar process for how I execute that task, okay? And I guarantee you they're not getting rounds on that target before me, okay? They're better shooters, but I'm getting accurate rounds on that target before them. I know that would be a fact because there's just things that you have to know about the tactic in order to increase the speed at which you can get to marksmanship. And I think that's pretty cool. So hopefully in the future, it'd be cool if a bunch of people were willing to just be like, not worried about their ego, not worried about the way they might look, and have no skin in the game, and just want to go, okay, yeah, this stuff matters, right? Because the common thing with the marksmanship guys is tactics doesn't matter. That's crazy. Like, it can be proven to matter very quickly, and I would love to do that someday.